Welcome to stenojunction.com. My name is Ankit, currently working for Government of Rajasthan, and I have over 10 years of experience of teaching stenography. It is high speed, 180 words per minute, starting in 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1, start. Questions of equity apart, the mode and scale of subsidizing has had two effects. One has been to induce a faster rate of growth of enrollments at this level than is otherwise likely to have taken place. In several parts of the country, the fees charged for higher education have remained unchanged for decades, and the rising costs have been almost wholly covered by the subsidies from government. Higher education has therefore become almost free for those who are in a position to meet the other related expenses. The other effect has been to encourage in the sphere, particularly in the last decade, a kind of entrepreneurship with little commitment to the goals of higher education, where the rate of subsidy is high and the rest of the expenditure can be almost fully covered by fees collected from the students. A college can be started and run with very little exertion on the parts of the sponsors. In Delhi, percent of excess expenditure of a college on all approved items over its income from fees is met by the University Grants Commission. The sponsoring body, whether it is a private agency or a local authority, needs therefore to cover only a very small fraction of the total expenditure on running a college. Naturally, there is no dearth of entrepreneurs for starting colleges with an eye on the patronage and influence they can exercise through their control over them. Though the extent of subsidy is not as high elsewhere, the position is not very different in several other parts of the country, where liberal grants and aid are given by state governments to colleges. The main qualification required of the promoters of higher education under these conditions is only that they have the contacts for securing the necessary financial and other support from the powers that be. Where the rest of the subsidy is not so high, some adjustments are called for. These are usually made in the fees charged from students and in the teacher-student ratios maintained. Thus, the annual fee for undergraduate education ranges all the way from less than rupees 1,000 per student in Rajasthan to well over rupees 2,000 per student in Bombay. The average number of students assigned to a teacher also varies from as low as 20 in some areas to more than twice that figure in others. The subsidy has to be discontinued. All this has usually a decisive impact at the higher levels of decision making and administration in the universities for both the representatives of college managements and of teachers to secure representation in the various bodies of the universities of which they form a part. Changes in the structure and content of courses are therefore usually resisted if they call for more appointments at the college level than the managements are prepared to make, or if much more effort is required on the part of the existing staff. If any teaching is organized at the university level, as is usually done by postgraduate courses, the principle of representation has to be usually given considerable weight, irrespective of academic considerations. The various sectional interests involved have to be taken into account also when examiners are appointed by universities, and sometimes even when the results of the examinations are declared. Universities, as organized now, are in fact highly vulnerable to pressures of various kinds. The representations given to colleges, the system of elections to the more important decision-making bodies, and direct dependence on government grants are all potential instruments for gaining influence and exerting pressure within universities. It is not surprising, therefore, that when teachers and students are also free to participate in political activities, universities get affected very quickly by all the undercurrents and conflicts in the society of which they are a part. One of the major problems now is that while political forces are able to gain entry very easily, the universities do not have the means for effectively coping with them. Under these conditions, growth in size beyond a point becomes a particularly serious handicap. Not only are there few economies of scales to be gained by such expansion, but these economies set in through their greater vulnerability to pressure from outside and from within. This has become a major problem for many Indian universities. The growing tendencies towards regionalism in the country have also had serious effect on higher education. These tendencies are expressed in demands related to the medium of instruction. Some of these demands are based on sound educational principles and are wholly justifiable, but in the most extreme form, they usually indicate either ignorance of the minimum requirements of higher education or inward-looking conduct of a kind that places considerations of a selfish character above these requirements. In practice, both have been in evidence. More specifically, the problem arises when instruction at the postgraduate level is sought to be given in the regional languages, for most of the relevant literature at that level is usually not available. Whereas, I rise to support the demands that have been placed before the House by the Home Minister. Sir, I need not remind the House that this year the Home Ministry's demands are being discussed in a context which can be described as most unexampled. It is for the first time that we are discussing the demands of this ministry after the country passed through the period of emergency that rocked the very basic structure of our constitution and our policy and made the common people of our country realize what they have lost with the eclipse of their fundamental rights and freedom. Sir, the 19 month of rule marked the culmination of a concerted effort to undermine democracy. Those who wanted to destroy the democracy and convert our system into a totalitarian system had looked upon the Home Ministry as the main instrument for forcing their will on the nation. They wanted to substitute the rule of law with a reign of terror, to place individuals above the law, to provide immunity to those whom the group liked, and to harass all those who were looked upon as dangerous to the monopoly of power that the extra constitutional caucus wanted to preserve. The then Home Minister was himself a captive of this caucus. It was practically a totalitarian regime and was therefore bound to be a police regime. That's why I would request the Home Minister that the whole police department should be thoroughly overhauled. Sir, I do not want to take the time of the House by listing the various agencies and organizations that were set up in the police department and the home department during emergency. And before that, I also do not want to take the time of the House in describing the fabulous amounts of money that had been placed in the disposal of RAW and other agencies. Even the money was placed at the disposal of certain individuals, and that was exempted from the scrutiny of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India or the Parliament. I do not want to go into these details, but I would request the Home Minister to go into these things and ensure that such things do not happen in future. Under the circumstances, sir, the task of the Home Minister is therefore one of the dismantling the police state that was built up by the previous government. Sir, I must congratulate the Home Minister for the excellent beginning that he has made and for the speed that he has acquired to restore the fundamental rights to the citizen, and to appoint commission of inquiry to go into the excesses of the earlier rule, as well as the shocking scandals that had characterized last years of the previous regime. However, in all humility, I must confess that it is not enough. The 42nd Amendment of the Constitution should be withdrawn immediately. The fundamental rights will have to be fully restored. The role and power of the judiciary must be restored immediately. Then the necessary correction in the attitude of the police cannot be achieved if at this moment we do not differentiate between those officers and men who acted on instructions and those who went out of their way to trouble and harass people during the earlier rule. If we do not differentiate between these people and do not give to guilty exemplary punishment that would serve as deterrent and corrective, we would not be able to reorganize the police department. Now I come to the area of general administration, for which the Home Ministry is wholly responsible. Our public offices have not under great reputation for efficiency. Public petitions and letters remain unanswered and considerations for months and months together. Public petitions and letters written by the public representatives, councillors, legislators, or members of Parliament, even to the ministers, leave aside the officers, remain unanswered or under consideration for years together. Sometimes we do not get a reply at all to our letters. Our people have to suffer because of this. We hope the Home Minister will see that these people function efficiently, and even after years of our own government, these public officers, especially officers like block development officers and the public officials, do not behave properly, and they even behave very badly to the public. The Home Minister should look into this so that the public officer behave properly and in a manner to instill confidence in the people that it is their own government which wants to serve them and not to terrorize them. Within the time you have given, I want to draw my attention to the Home Minister to a very important matter. I know the law and order is a state subject. Honorable member was telling that our Home Minister has encroached upon the state subject. Sir, if some state governments and the chief ministers and ministers behave in such a way which is against people's interests, naturally Government of India have to take action against these people. Stop.